The morning sun was just starting to peek over the Texas hills when Mary heard the sound that would change her life forever. It was the creaking of wagon wheels and the heavy footsteps of her husband moving around outside their small cabin. 8 months pregnant and struggling to get out of bed, Mary pressed her hands against her swollen belly and called out, "Robert? What are you doing out there so early?" Silence. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and walked to the window. What she saw made her heart stop. Robert was loading their belongings onto the old wooden wagon. Not some of their things, everything, the cooking pots, the extra blankets, even the small bag of coins they had been saving for the baby's arrival. "Robert?" she called again, her voice shaking now. "What's happening? Where are you taking our things?" He didn't answer. He didn't even look at her. Mary had been married to Robert for 3 years, and she knew that look on his face. It was the same expression he wore when he came home from the saloon after losing money at cards, cold, distant, like he was already somewhere else in his mind. She grabbed her boots and struggled to put them on. Her belly made everything difficult. These days, simple tasks like bending over or walking up the porch steps left her breathless. The baby was due any day now, and she had been looking forward to Robert's help during the birth. Their nearest neighbors lived more than 10 miles away, and the town doctor was even farther. By the time Mary made it outside, Robert had already loaded most of their possessions. He was tying down a bundle of clothes with rope, still avoiding her eyes. "Robert, please talk to me," Mary said, trying to keep her voice calm. "What's wrong? Did something happen? Are we moving somewhere?" Finally, he turned to look at her. The coldness in his eyes made her take a step back. "We're not going anywhere, Mary," he said quietly. "I am—" The words hit her like a physical blow. She felt dizzy and had to grab onto the porch railing for support. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You're leaving?" "But the baby... Our child is going to be born any day now." "That's exactly why I have to go," Robert said, his voice getting harder. "I never wanted this life. I never wanted to be stuck on this godforsaken piece of land, struggling just to grow enough food to survive. And I sure never wanted the responsibility of a child." Mary felt tears starting to burn behind her eyes, but she fought them back. "But you said, when we got married, you said we would build a life together. You said you wanted children." Robert let out a bitter laugh. "I said a lot of things, Mary. People say things to get what they want. I wanted you, that's true, but I never wanted this." He waved his hand at the small cabin, the vegetable garden, the simple life they had built together. "I've been thinking about this for months," he continued, not seeming to notice how pale Mary had become. "Ever since you started showing, I knew I couldn't do it. I can't be tied down to a wife and a screaming baby. I'm still young. There's a whole world out there, and I'm not going to waste my life changing diapers and worrying about crop failures." Mary sank down onto the porch steps, her legs too weak to hold her up. "Where will you go?" "West," Robert said simply. "California, maybe? I hear there are opportunities there for a man willing to work hard. Gold still to be found if you know where to look." "And what about me?" Mary asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What am I supposed to do?" For the first time, Robert looked uncomfortable. He shifted from foot to foot and glanced away. "You'll figure it out. You're stronger than you think." "Robert, please," Mary said, struggling to stand up again. "I'm 8 months pregnant. I have no money, no family nearby. The baby could come any day. You can't just leave me here alone." "I can and I am," Robert said firmly. He walked over to where his horse was tied up next to the wagon. "I've made up my mind, Mary. Nothing you say is going to change it." Mary watched in horror as he mounted his horse. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not when she needed him most. "The neighbors," she said desperately. "The Johnsons. They're good people. If something happens during the birth, they'll help me." "The Johnsons moved back east last month," Robert said without emotion. "Their crops failed too many times. They gave up and went back to her family in Missouri." Mary's heart sank even further. She had forgotten about the Johnsons leaving. She had been so focused on preparing for the baby that she hadn't really thought about how isolated they had become. There has to be someone, she said, more to herself than to Robert. The Millers? The family with the 3 boys? Gone too, Robert said. Drought got their cattle. They packed up 2 weeks ago. The reality of her situation was starting to hit Mary like waves crashing against rocks. She was truly alone out here. No neighbors, no family, no help when the baby came. Robert, she said, her voice breaking now, please don't do this, I'm begging you. If you don't want the responsibility, fine. We can give the baby to a family who wants children. There are people in town who would take a child. Just don't leave me here alone to face this. Robert had been adjusting his saddle, but he stopped and looked at her again. For just a moment, Mary thought she saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Maybe some small part of him still cared about her, but then his expression hardened again. It's too late, Mary, he said. I should have done this months ago. I've already wasted too much time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth bag. The bag that held their savings. Mary's heart jumped, thinking he was going to leave her the money. At least then she could try to make it to town, maybe find someone to help with the birth. Instead, Robert tucked the bag into his saddlebag. That's our money, Mary said weakly. We saved that together. For the baby. I earned most of it, Robert said. And I'm going to need it where I'm going. Mary felt something break inside her chest. Not just her heart, but something deeper. Her faith in people. Her trust in the man she had loved and married. How can you do this? She whispered. How can you be so cruel? Robert was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost too quiet to hear. Survival makes. People do things they never thought they would do, Mary, this frontier life. It changes you. It makes you hard. I'd rather be cruel and free than trapped and miserable. He clicked his tongue and his horse started moving. Just like that, he was riding away from everything they had built together. Mary stood there on the porch, watching him get smaller and smaller as he rode toward the horizon. She kept thinking he would change his mind, that he would turn around and come back, maybe not because he loved her, but because it was the right thing to do. But he never looked back. Not once. As the sun climbed higher in the sky and Robert disappeared completely from view, Mary finally allowed herself to cry. She cried for the man she thought she had married. She cried for the future she had imagined with him. And she cried for the baby who would be born into this world without a father. But even as the tears fell, Mary knew she couldn't afford to fall apart completely. She had a child coming, and somehow she was going to have to find the strength to bring that baby into the world alone. She placed both hands on her belly and felt the baby kick, as if responding to her touch. It's going to be all right, she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Somehow we're going to be all right. As evening approached and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Mary went back inside the cabin that now felt too big and too empty. She had no idea that in just 3 days her life would change in ways she never could have imagined. 3 days had passed since Robert rode away, and Mary was learning what true loneliness felt like. The silence in the cabin was so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat. She had tried to keep busy, organizing the few things Robert had left behind, but there wasn't much to do. He had taken almost everything of value. On the morning of the 4th day, Mary woke up with a sharp pain in her lower back. At first, she thought she had just slept wrong on the thin mattress. But as she tried to get out of bed, another wave of pain hit her, this one stronger and wrapping around her entire belly. No, she whispered to herself. Not yet. Please, not yet. But her body had its own plans. Over the next hour, the pains came more frequently. Mary had helped deliver babies before, back when she lived with her aunt in Missouri. She knew what was happening. Her baby was coming, whether she was ready or not. Mary tried to stay calm and think clearly. She filled the large pot with water and put it on the stove to heat. She gathered the clean rags she had been saving for the birth. She even managed to move the rocking chair closer to the bed, thinking she might need something to hold on to during the worst parts. But as the labor pains got stronger, all her careful preparations seemed pointless. When a really bad contraction hit, she couldn't think about anything except the pain. She found herself gripping the bedpost so hard her knuckles turned white. Trying not to scream because there was no one to hear her anyway, hours passed. Mary lost track of time completely. Sometimes she would look out the window and be surprised that it was still daylight. Other times she was sure days had gone by, only to realize the sun had barely moved in the sky. The worst part wasn't the physical pain, though that was terrible enough. The worst part was the fear. What if something went wrong? What if the baby was stuck? What if she bled too much? Back in Missouri, she had seen births that didn't go well. She knew that women died bringing children into the world, especially when they were alone. Please, God, Mary found herself praying between contractions. I know I haven't been to church in months, but please help me through this. Help my baby be born safely. As the sun began to set, Mary felt a change in her body. The urge to push was overwhelming, stronger than anything she had ever experienced. She braced herself against the headboard and pushed with everything she had. The baby came faster than Mary had expected. One moment she was pushing and crying out from the effort, and the next moment there was a tiny, slippery form in her hands. For a terrifying second, the baby was silent, and Mary's heart stopped. Then the most beautiful sound in the world filled the cabin. Her baby's first cry. "Oh," Mary breathed, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, you're here, you're really here." The baby was a girl, small but perfect. Mary cleaned her daughter with shaking hands, amazed at how tiny her fingers were, how perfect her little nose looked. When she wrapped the baby in the softest blanket she had, the crying stopped, and the infant looked up at her with dark, serious eyes. "Hello, little one," Mary whispered. "I'm your mama. I know this isn't the welcome you deserved, but I promise I'll take care of you. I promise I'll love you enough for two parents." But even as Mary held her daughter close, she could feel that something wasn't right with her own body. She was bleeding, more than she should be, and she felt dizzy and weak. The effort of giving birth had taken almost everything she had. Mary managed to get herself and the baby settled in bed, but she could barely keep her eyes open. She knew she should try to eat something, should try to clean up the cabin, but she didn't have the strength. All she could do was hold her daughter and try to stay awake. That's when she heard the horses dot at first. Mary thought she was imagining it. The sound of hoofbeats seemed to come from very far away, like something from a dream. But as the sound got closer, Mary's eyes snapped open fully. Someone was coming. Mary's heart started racing, but not with joy. Out here on the frontier, unexpected visitors could mean trouble. There were stories of raiders, of men who would take advantage of isolated homesteads. A woman alone with a newborn baby would be completely defenseless. She struggled to sit up. In bed, clutching her daughter to her chest, through the small window, she could see several riders approaching the cabin. Even in her weakened state, Mary could tell these weren't settlers or neighbors. The way they sat on their horses, the way they moved together as a group, was different from any white men she had seen dot as they got closer. Mary realized these were Native Americans. Her heart pounded even harder. She had heard so many stories about Indian raids, about families killed or captured, but she was too weak to run, too weak to fight, too weak to do anything except hold her baby and wait. The riders stopped just outside the cabin. Mary could hear them talking to each other in a language she didn't understand. Their voices were low and serious, not angry or threatening, but that didn't comfort her much. Then she heard footsteps approaching the door. Mary closed her eyes and tried to make herself as small as possible, hoping somehow they might not notice she was there. But she knew it was useless. The horses tied outside, the smoke from the chimney, the signs of recent activity all made it clear that someone lived here. A gentle knock came at the door. Mary was so surprised she almost gasped out loud. She had expected them to just break in. The knock came again, still gentle, almost respectful. A voice called out something in the native language, then switched to heavily accented English. "Hello? Someone inside? We help? Help?" Mary wasn't sure she had heard correctly. Maybe it was a trick. Maybe they were trying to get her to open the door willingly. But then she heard something that changed everything. One of the men outside was speaking to the others, and even though Mary didn't understand the words, she recognized the tone. It was the same tone she had heard in her own voice just hours earlier. Pain, loss, grief, somehow. Mary found the strength to speak. "I'm here," she called out weakly. "I'm here with my baby." The talking outside stopped immediately. Then the same voice spoke again, this time more gently. "We come inside? You sound sick." Mary looked down at her newborn daughter, who was sleeping peacefully despite all the commotion. She thought about her options, but the truth was, she didn't have any. She was too weak to run, too weak to fight, and if these men wanted to harm her, a locked door wouldn't stop them anyway. "The door isn't locked," she said finally. The door opened slowly, carefully. The first man to enter was tall and lean, with long black hair and intelligent dark eyes. He was dressed in traditional clothing, but Mary noticed he moved with caution, his hands visible and empty, clearly trying not to frighten her. When his eyes fell on Mary and the baby, his expression changed completely. The wariness disappeared, replaced by something Mary hadn't expected to see, compassion. He said something to the other men, who stayed outside, then approached the bed slowly. He pointed to himself and said clearly, "Ayana." Mary realized he was telling her his name. She managed to whisper back, "Mary." Ayana nodded, then gestured toward the baby and said something that sounded like a question. When Mary looked confused, he tried again in English. Double quotes, "Baby. Do baby. Today." Mary nodded. Weakly. "Yes, today, this morning." Ayana's expression grew even more gentle. He spoke to the men outside, and Mary heard them moving around, but not in a threatening way. It sounded like they were making camp. Then Ayana turned back to her and said something that made Mary start crying again, not from fear this time, but from relief. "We help," he said simply. "You safe now?" And somehow, looking into this stranger's kind eyes, Mary believed him. After 4 days of being completely alone, after the terror of giving birth by herself, after losing all hope that anyone would ever help her again, this man and his companions had appeared like an answer to her desperate prayers. Mary didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time since Robert had ridden away, she felt like she and her daughter might actually survive. Mary woke up to the sound of women's voices speaking softly nearby. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. The bed felt different, and there were unfamiliar smells in the air. Herbs she didn't recognize, wood smoke that smelled different from her own fireplace, and something cooking that made her stomach growl with hunger. Then she remembered. Ayana and his companions had found her after the birth. But where was she now? This wasn't her cabin. Mary tried to sit up, panic rising in her chest. Where was her baby? She looked around frantically and saw her daughter sleeping peacefully in a beautiful cradle made of woven grass and decorated with small beads. The baby looked healthy and content, wrapped in a soft blanket that wasn't one of Mary's. "Your little one is beautiful," said a voice in careful English. Mary turned to see a woman about her own age sitting nearby. She had kind eyes and was working on what looked like beadwork while keeping an eye on the baby. When she saw Mary was awake, she smiled and set her work aside. "I am Dancing Bird," the woman said. "I have been watching over you and your daughter while you slept. You were very sick after the birth." "How long have I been here?" Mary asked, her voice still weak. 4 days, Dancing Bird replied. "Ayana brought you to our village. Our medicine. Woman, Grandmother Willow helped heal you. You lost much blood, but you are strong. You will be well." Mary looked around the dwelling she was in. It was larger than her cabin had been, with beautiful woven mats on the ground and painted designs on the walls. Everything was clean and organized, and she could hear the sounds of a busy community outside. "My baby," Mary started to say, trying to get up. "She is fine," Dancing Bird assured her quickly. "The women of our village have been helping to feed her and care for her while you recovered. We know how to care for newborns. Many of us are mothers too." As if on cue, the baby started to make soft sounds, and Dancing Bird carefully picked her up and brought her to Mary. The moment Mary held her daughter again, she felt a wave of relief and love, so strong it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," Mary whispered. "Thank you for taking care of her. Over the next few days, Mary slowly regained her strength. The women of the village brought her food and helped her learn to care for her baby in her weakened state. They showed her how to make a special tea that would help her body heal, and they shared stories about their own children to keep her spirits up. But it was Ayana who spent the most time with her. Every evening he would come to sit by the fire and practice his English while Mary slowly learned words in his language. She discovered that he was a respected member of the tribe, known for his wisdom and his skill as a hunter, one evening. About a week after Mary had arrived at the village, Ayana seemed more serious than usual. He sat quietly for a long time, staring into the fire, before he finally spoke. "I want to tell you why I helped you," he said carefully, choosing each English word with care. "Why I brought you here." Mary adjusted her sleeping daughter in her arms and waited for him to continue. "Last winter," Ayana began, "my wife was carrying our first child. She was so happy, always talking about what we would teach the baby, how we would watch him grow strong." Mary could hear the pain in his voice, even though his English was simple and halting. "But when the time came for the birth," Ayana continued, "something went wrong. The baby was turned the wrong way, and my wife, she fought so hard, but—" He stopped talking and looked down at his hands. "They both died," Mary said softly, understanding. Ayana nodded. "My wife, Little Star, and our son. I lost them both in one day. For months after, I was angry at everything. Angry at the spirits, angry at the world, angry at myself for not being able to save them." Mary felt her heart breaking for this man who had shown her such kindness. She understood now why he had looked at her and her newborn daughter with such compassion. "When we found you," Ayana said, looking up at her again, "you were lying in that bed, holding your baby just like Little Star held our son before." He paused and took a deep breath. "But you and your daughter were alive. I thought maybe the spirits sent us to find you for a reason." "I'm so sorry for your loss," Mary said quietly. "And I'm grateful that you saved us, but I don't understand why my husband left me. Why would any man abandon his wife and child?" This was the first time Mary had really talked about Robert since arriving at the village. She had been too weak before and too focused on her baby. But now, as her strength returned, the anger and hurt were starting to surface. "Tell me about this man," Ayana said. "Tell me what happened," so Mary told him everything. About how Robert had seemed different after she started showing her pregnancy, how he had become distant and cold. She told him about the morning she woke up to find him packing everything they owned, and about the cruel words he had spoken before riding away. As Mary talked, she watched Ayana's expression change. His jaw grew tight and his hands clenched into fists. When she finished her story, he was quiet for a long time. "In my people's way," Ayana finally said, "a man who abandons his pregnant wife is lower than a snake. A snake kills to survive, but this man, he hurt you just because he is weak and selfish." "I keep thinking I did something wrong," Mary admitted. "Maybe if I had been a better wife, maybe if I hadn't gotten pregnant so soon. No," Ayana said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. A real man protects his family. A real man stays and fights. When times are hard, this Robert, he is not a man. He's a coward." Mary had never heard anyone speak about Robert with such anger on her behalf. Even her own family had always told her that marriage was about making sacrifices and accepting whatever her husband decided. But Ayana seemed genuinely outraged that anyone would treat her the way Robert had. "Where did he go?" Ayana asked. "Do you know where this coward went when he left you?" "He said he was going west," Mary replied. "Maybe to California." He talked about finding gold, about opportunities for a man willing to work hard. She laughed bitterly. But Robert was never willing to work that hard. He just liked to dream about easy money. Ayana nodded thoughtfully. "Men like that, they do not change. He will end up in towns and saloons, spending what money he has and looking for more easy ways to get rich." Over the following weeks, Mary settled into life with the tribe. She learned to cook their traditional foods and helped the women with their daily work as much as she was able while caring for her daughter. The baby thrived in the village, with so many people around to love and protect her. Mary also spent more time with Ayana, and she began to see him not just as her rescuer but as a friend. He told her stories about his childhood, about hunting, trips and ceremonies, about the changing seasons on the plains. In return, Mary shared memories of her life before Robert, stories about growing up with her aunt and learning to run a household. But as comfortable as Mary became in the village, she could see that Ayana was struggling with something. Sometimes, she would catch him staring off into the distance with a dark expression on his face. When she asked him what he was thinking about, he would just shake his head and change the subject. One evening, as they sat watching Mary's daughter sleep, Ayana finally told her what was on his mind. "I have been talking to the traders who come through our territory," he said. "I have been asking about your husband." Mary felt a chill run down her spine. "Why? Because a man like that, he should face consequences for what he did," Ayana replied. "In my culture, we believe that when someone does great harm to another person, especially to a woman and child, justice must be served." "Ayana," Mary said carefully, "what are you planning to do?" He looked at her with those dark, serious eyes that had first made her feel safe when she was at her most vulnerable. "I'm going to find him," Ayana said simply. "And when I do, he will learn what it means to abandon the people who needed him most." Mary felt scared and grateful and worried all at the same time. No one had ever cared enough about her to seek justice on her behalf. But she was also afraid of what that justice might look like, and what it might mean for Ayana and his people if he went through with whatever he was planning. As she looked down at her sleeping daughter, Mary realized that her life had become something she never could have imagined. She was living with people she had been taught to fear, being protected by a man whose own loss had made him understand her pain, and now she was learning that sometimes justice came from the most unexpected places. Spring arrived at the village like a gentle promise. The harsh winter winds gave way to warm breezes, and Mary watched her daughter grow stronger with each passing day. Little Grace, as Mary had named her, was now 3 months old and beginning to smile at the faces around her. The village women adored her, often competing to hold her and make her laugh with their funny faces and gentle songs. Mary had settled into the rhythm of village life more easily than she ever thought possible. She helped gather herbs with the medicine woman, learned to weave baskets from the other women, and even started picking up more of the Comanche language. For the first time in her adult life, she felt like she belonged somewhere, but she could see that Ayana was growing more restless with each day. He would disappear for hours at a time, returning with news from traders and travelers who passed through their territory. Mary knew he was gathering information about Robert, and it made her both grateful and worried. One morning, Ayana came back from one of his trips with a grim expression on his face. He found Mary sitting under her favorite tree, nursing Grace, while watching the other children play nearby. "I have news," he said, settling down beside her on the grass. Mary looked up at him, noting the tension in his voice. "What kind of news?" "A trader came through yesterday. He had been in the settlement of Willow Creek, about 2 days' ride east of here," Ayana began. "He was drinking in the saloon there when he heard a man bragging loudly about his freedom." Mary's stomach tightened. She had a feeling she knew where this was going. "The man was telling everyone how smart he was to escape before he got trapped with a wife and screaming baby." Ayana continued, his voice getting harder. "He was buying drinks for other men, spending money freely, and laughing about how he left his problems behind. It was Robert," Mary said quietly. "It wasn't a question." The trader described him perfectly. "Brown hair, average height, scar on his left hand from a farming accident," Ayana confirmed. "But that's not the worst part." Mary adjusted Grace in her arms, preparing herself for whatever else Ayana had learned. "This man, your Robert, he has been telling people that his wife was captured by savages." Ayana said, the word savages coming out like something bitter he had to spit out. "He's been making himself look like a victim, saying he barely escaped with his life." Mary felt anger rising in her chest, hotter than anything she had experienced before. "He's lying, making people feel sorry for him while he abandoned his own." "Child, there's more?" Ayana said. The trader heard him talking about how he's planning to head further west soon, maybe to the gold fields in California. But first he wants to enjoy himself for a while longer. Mary was quiet for a moment, looking down at Grace's peaceful face. Her daughter was completely innocent in all of this, yet Robert was out there telling lies about her, making her sound like some kind of burden he had heroically escaped from. "What are you going to do?" Mary asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. Ayanna was quiet for a long time, staring out at the horizon where the prairie grass waved in the spring. "Breeze, I'm going to find him," he said finally. "But I'm not going to kill him if that's what you're worried about." Mary felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Then what? "Death would be too easy for a man like that," Ayanna explained. "In my culture, we have different ways of dealing with people who bring dishonor to themselves and hurt others. Robert needs to face the consequences of his choices, but he also needs to live with those consequences for the rest of his life." Over the next few days, Ayanna began making preparations for his journey. Mary watched him check his weapons, gather supplies, and speak quietly with the other men in the tribe. She could see the determination in every movement he made. But as much as Mary wanted justice for what Robert had done to her and Grace, she was terrified of losing Ayanna. He had become more than just her rescuer. He had become her closest friend, the person she trusted most in the world, and maybe even something more, though she wasn't ready to admit that to herself yet. "I don't want you to go," Mary told him one evening as they sat by the fire. Grace was sleeping in her lap, and the rest of the village was settling down for the night. "I have to," Ayanna replied. "Every day that man lives freely, enjoying the money he stole from you and your child, is another day that justice is denied. But what if something happens to you?" Mary asked. "What if you get hurt, or arrested, or worse?" Ayanna reached over and gently touched Grace's tiny hand. "Then you and your daughter will be cared for by my people for as long as you need. You are part of this family now, Mary. You don't have to worry about being alone again." Mary felt tears starting to form in her eyes. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. I can't lose you too, Ayanna, not after everything." For a moment, Ayanna looked like he wanted to say something important, but then he seemed to change his mind. "I will be careful," he said instead, "and I will come back. I promise you that." 2 more weeks passed before Ayanna finally got the information he had been waiting for. A group of hunters returned from a trip to the east with news that Robert had been seen in the town of Cedar Ridge, still drinking heavily and still spending money freely. "He's been there for over a week," one of the hunters reported. "Seems like he's made himself comfortable. The bartender at the saloon says he rents a room above the tavern and spends most of his days gambling and most of his nights drinking." Ayanna nodded grimly. "Good. A man who stays in one place is easier to find than one who keeps moving?" That night, Mary barely slept. She kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong, all the ways this quest for justice could turn into a tragedy. When morning came, she found Ayanna already awake, loading supplies onto his horse. "You're leaving now?" Mary asked. "The sooner I go, the sooner I can come back," Ayanna replied. "And if I wait too long, Robert might move on to another town." Mary walked over to him, still carrying Grace, who was just waking up and making soft baby sounds. "Promise me something," Mary said. "What?" "Promise me you won't let your anger make you do something you'll regret later," Mary said. "I want Robert to face consequences for what he did, but I don't want you to become someone different because of him. You're a good man, Ayanna. Don't let Robert's evil change that." Ayanna stopped what he was doing and looked at her seriously. "You don't need to worry about that. My anger is cold, not hot. I'm not going to act without thinking. Everything I do will be planned and purposeful." "That's what worries me," Mary said softly. Ayanna walked over to her and gently touched Grace's cheek. The baby looked up at him with her big dark eyes and made a happy gurgling sound. "I'm not doing this just for you," Ayanna said quietly. "I'm doing it for her too. And for my wife and son who died, and for every woman and child who has been abandoned by a man who was supposed to protect them. Robert represents something that needs to be stopped." Mary understood then that this was about more than just her situation. Ayana saw Robert as a symbol of everything wrong with men who put their own comfort above the welfare of their families. How long will you be gone? Mary asked. I don't know, Ayana admitted. It depends on how long it takes to find him and how long it takes to make sure he gets what he deserves. Other members of the tribe came to see Ayana off. The elderly chief spoke to him in their language for several minutes, placing a hand on his shoulder in what Mary recognized as a blessing or a farewell wish for safety. Dancing, Bird came to stand beside Mary as Ayana mounted his horse. He will come back, she said quietly. Ayana always keeps his promises. I hope so, Mary replied, adjusting Grace in her arms. Ayana rode over to where Mary stood and looked down at her from his horse. Take care of yourself and little Grace. I will be back before you know it. Be safe, Mary said. And remember what I said about not letting anger change who you are? Ayana nodded, then turned his horse toward the east and began riding away. Mary watched until he was just a small figure on the horizon, then until she couldn't see him at all. As she walked back to the village with Grace in her arms, Mary tried to push down her fears and focus on her hope. Ayana was smart and strong. And careful. He would find Robert, deliver whatever justice he had planned, and come home safely. But deep down, Mary couldn't shake the feeling that when Ayana returned, everything would be different. And she wasn't sure if different would be better or worse. 3 weeks had passed since Ayana left the village, and Mary found herself looking toward the eastern horizon dozens of times each day. Every time she saw a rider in the distance, her heart would jump, hoping it was him returning home safely. But each time, it turned out to be hunters from the tribe or traders passing through the territory. Dancing Bird tried to keep Mary's spirits up by involving her in more village activities, and the other women made sure she always had company during the long evenings. But Mary could tell they were all worried too. Warriors sometimes went on journeys and didn't come back, and everyone knew the risks Ayana was taking. Grace was growing bigger and stronger every day, now 4 months old and beginning to reach for objects with her tiny hands. Mary would hold her daughter up to see the sunset each evening and whisper, Your Uncle Ayana is coming back soon. He promised, and he always keeps his promises. Then, on a warm morning in late spring, Mary heard the sound of hooves approaching the village. But this time, something was different. There were more horses than usual, and she could hear voices calling out in excitement. Mary rushed outside, carrying Grace, and saw a group of riders approaching. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized Ayana at the front of the group. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, she could see another horse with someone tied across it, and what looked like a small group of white settlers following behind. The entire village came out to see what was happening as Ayana and his party rode into the center of the community. Mary could see immediately that Ayana was unharmed, but there was something different about his expression. He looked satisfied in a way she had never seen before. As the group dismounted, Mary finally got a clear look at the person who had been tied to the horse. It was Robert, but he looked nothing like the confident man who had abandoned her months ago. His clothes were dirty and torn, his face was sunburned and unshaven, and his eyes held a look of complete defeat. Ayana walked over to Mary, and despite everything that had happened, she felt a wave of relief so strong it made her knees weak. He was back. He was safe, and from the look on his face, justice had been served. You kept your promise, Mary said softly, shifting Grace to one arm so she could reach out and touch Ayana's hand. I told you I would come back, Ayana replied, his voice gentle despite the hardness still in his eyes. And I told you that Robert would face the consequences of what he did. Mary looked over at her former husband, who was now sitting on the ground with his hands tied behind his back, looking around at the village with obvious fear. What happened? Mary asked. What did you do to him? Ayana gestured toward the small group of white settlers who had followed them to the village. These people will tell you better than I can. They saw everything. An older man with a gray beard stepped forward. He looked nervous but determined to speak. Ma'am, he said, tipping his hat to Mary, my name is Henry Walsh. I was in Cedar Ridge when this all happened, and I wanted to come here myself to tell you what I witnessed. What did you see? Mary asked. Henry glanced at Robert, then back at Mary. Your friend here, he nodded toward Ayanna. He tracked your husband down to the saloon where he was spending most of his time. But he didn't just burst in and start a fight like most men would have done. Mary waited for him to continue, holding Grace a little closer. Instead, he sat in that saloon for 3 days, just watching and listening, Henry continued. And let me tell you, what he heard would have made any decent person sick to their stomach. Another settler, a woman about Mary's age, stepped forward. I'm Henry's daughter, Beth. I was working in the general store across from the saloon, and I could hear your husband through the windows. He was telling the most awful lies about you. Mary felt her anger rising again, but she forced herself to stay calm and listen. He was telling people that you were lazy and worthless, Beth continued. He said you were probably dead by now, and good riddance, he even said. She paused, looking uncomfortable. What? Mary asked. He said the baby probably wasn't even his, and that's why he left, Beth finished quietly. He was laughing about it, buying drinks for other men and making jokes about how smart he was to escape before getting trapped. Mary felt like she had been slapped. Even after everything Robert had done, she hadn't expected him to stoop so low as to question Grace's parentage. That's when your friend decided to act, Henry said, looking at Ayanna with obvious respect. But what he did was brilliant, if you don't mind me saying so. Tell me, Mary said. Ayanna spoke up for the first time. I waited until Robert had. I'd been drinking heavily and was feeling very confident. Then I walked into the saloon and announced to everyone there who I was and why I had come. He didn't threaten violence, Henry added quickly. He just told the truth. He explained how Robert had abandoned his pregnant wife, stolen their savings, and left her to die alone. Then he challenged Robert to defend his actions in front of everyone. Beth nodded enthusiastically. Your husband tried to lie his way out of it, but your friend had facts. He knew exactly how much money Robert had stolen, exactly when he had left you, exactly how pregnant you were. Robert couldn't deny any of it. But the real genius, Henry continued, was what happened next. Your friend announced that in his culture, a man who abandons his pregnant wife forfeits his right to be called a man at all. Mary looked at Ayanna, beginning to understand what kind of justice he had delivered. I challenged him to combat, Ayanna said simply. Not to the death, but to prove whether he was brave enough to fight for the honor he had thrown away. And, Mary asked, though she could guess the answer from Robert's current state, he refused, Ayanna said with satisfaction. In front of a room full of people, he refused to fight. He begged like a child, saying he didn't want any trouble. Henry laughed harshly. That's when things got really interesting. The other men in the saloon started to understand what kind of person they'd been drinking with. A few of them had wives and children of their own, and they didn't take kindly to learning they'd been sharing drinks with a man who would abandon a pregnant woman. They turned on him, Mary asked. Like wolves, Beth confirmed. They took back every drink they'd bought him, demanded he return the money he'd won from them in card games, and told him he wasn't welcome in their town anymore. Ayanna continued the story. I told everyone there that Robert would face the traditional punishment for his cowardice. I took his horse, his weapons, and all the money he had stolen from you and your daughter. Mary looked over at Robert, who was staring at the ground in complete humiliation. But that's not all, Henry added. Your friend here made sure word spread to every settlement and trading post within 100 miles. Everyone knows what Robert did now. No respectable person will do business with him, and no decent establishment will serve him. He's been marked as a man without honor, Ayanna explained. Wherever he goes, people will know what he is. Mary felt a deep sense of satisfaction, but also something else, closure, maybe, or justice finally served. What happens to him now? She asked. He walks, Ayanna said firmly. No horse, no weapons, no money. He makes his own way in the world, just like he forced you to do. But unlike you, he won't have the help of good people who care about him. Henry and Beth stayed for dinner with the village, sharing more details about what had happened in Cedar Ridge. They told Mary how the entire town had been talking about Ayanna's sense of justice and how impressed everyone was with his restraint and wisdom. Most men would have just shot him, Henry said. But what your friend did was better. Death would have been over quickly. This way, Robert has to live every day knowing that everyone knows what he really is. As the evening wore on and the visitors prepared to leave, Mary realized that this chapter of her life was finally closed. Robert was out of her life for good, Ayanna was back safely, and justice had been served in a way that satisfied her completely. Later that night, as Mary sat by the fire nursing Grace, Ayanna approached her quietly. "Are you satisfied with what happened?" he asked. Mary looked up at him. This man who had saved her life, protected her daughter, and sought justice on her behalf when no one else would. "Yes," she said simply, "but I'm more grateful that you came back safely. Grace and we need you." Ayanna sat down beside her, and for the first time since she'd known him, he smiled with genuine happiness instead of just kindness. "I need you both too," he admitted. "When I was tracking Robert, all I could think about was coming home to you. And Grace, somewhere along the way, you became my family." Mary felt her heart swell with an emotion she hadn't dared to hope for. Love, real love. The kind that came with protection and respect and genuine care. As she looked down at Grace, who was falling asleep contentedly in her arms, Mary realized that Robert's abandonment had led her to something better than she had ever imagined. She had found a man who would never leave, a community that would always support her, and a love that was built on honor instead of selfishness. Sometimes, she thought, the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best thing that ever happens to you. And sometimes justice comes in exactly the form you need it to, delivered by exactly the right person at exactly the right time.